with.
Thank you. I wish you all a very happy birthday and many more years of active Rotary service. May I now request Rotarian Farhad Jamal to introduce our guest speaker. Farhad. You're on mute, Farhad. Farhad, you're on mute.
Yes,
please unmute yourself. Yeah.
Yes, I did. Thank you, President. Good afternoon, fellow Rotarians. I have great pleasure in introducing our guest speaker, Dr. Frank-Jürgen Richter. Frank, thank you very much for finding time to be with us. We are indeed very grateful. Dr. Richter holds an industrial engineering degree from Karlsruhe Institute of Technology. He has also pursued his PhD studies from the University of Tsukuba and holds a doctorate from the University of Stuttgart. He's held many senior corporate positions, represented multinational, European multinationals for many years before he decided to hang his boots there and joined the World Economic Forum as a full-time director. In 2005 is then he started Horasis. He founded Horasis, which is an independent think tank for global business topics. He works with business people, politicians, intellectuals. Politicians, he just described the kind of level of people that he interacts is absolutely top-notch, from heads of states to UN Secretary General and what have you. So I'm sure he's got a wealth of knowledge on that front. He advises governments and private sector organizations on issues such as globalization, trade, and sustainable development. Dr. Richter is a frequent public speaker. He's authored, ladies and gentlemen, no less than 37 books, numerous articles on global strategy and Asian business, covering topics on the Asian business environment and how Asian firms bounced back after the 1998 financial crisis. His writings have appeared in financial newspapers and regional press, and New York Times, of course, has carried his piece many times over. He has addressed audiences such as at Brookings Institute, Harvard University, Beijing University, National Research University, Higher School of Economics in Moscow, Royal Institute of International Affairs, and many others. He has been interviewed by several mainstream news channels globally, which includes channels like, which all you're familiar with, CNN, CNBC, BBC, CCTV, which is the China main channel from China, and of course, the Voice of America. In 2016, Dr. Richter received the Harish Mahindra Memorial Global Award for outstanding contribution to the global economy from the Priyadarshini Academy. We're indeed very proud to have you, and looking forward to listening to you on vitalizing global economy. And over to you, Frank.
Thanks so much, Fahd. It's a great pleasure talking to you today, to the Rotarians. And, you know, I've been following the work of the Rotarians for many years, and I really admire the mission you have, bringing people together, like-minded people working on peace, and also joining hands for the global public good. I'm especially glad to talk to the Mumbai chapter of the Rotarians, and I see many common faces here, people I know here amongst you, and I've just seen my good friend Dilip Piramal, who's joining as well. Dilip, good morning to you and to all of you. It's a great pleasure. You know, I have a very long linkage with India. I've maybe been to India around 50 to 60 times in the last 15 years. So usually, you know, I come a couple of times per year, and we at Horasis host large-scale summits on emerging countries, linking them up with the established countries of the West, Europe and North America. And we very much believe in the future of India. Maybe just a few words about Horasis before I begin. And Fahd, you mentioned already a few glimpses on what we do. So we host large-scale summits every year. We just hosted our Horasis extraordinary meeting earlier this month, uniting 900 speakers from around 95 countries, including the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, a couple of head of states, around 15 ministers, and of course, a lot of captains of industry. And the idea really is to create a a stakeholder approach where business can talk to government and civil society. We very much believe in multilateralism as the philosophical backbone how to steer this world. Let me start, if I may, by saying that the current state of the world is quite gloomy. Whenever you listen to the news every day, you get some bad news. You read about the pandemic, the COVID pandemic, and actually it's getting worse. We are experiencing a second wave all over the world, especially in Europe. I have to say, things are not looking very good. Countries like Czech Republic and Belgium, there the numbers of infected people are skyrocketing. The same in the United States. There's a lot of controversy in the US, of course, now 2 weeks prior to the election, and COVID-19 is a major topic of the campaign between those candidates. And also, of course, India experienced skyrocketing numbers. The Indian government successfully actually tackled the first wave. India got one of the most severe lockdowns amongst all countries. And I think all kudos to the Indian government. So far, so good. But of course, India is a large country. It's a continent, and it's very difficult to contain the virus. Hope is there that the vaccine will come on the market sometimes in the first and second quarter next year, and hopefully things look better. Talking about bad news, it's not just health, it's not just COVID, but the impact of COVID on the economy. Most economies in the world are shrinking, and economists are talking about a new global economic crisis, much more severe than the crisis 10, 15 years ago, the Lehman crisis. But maybe more similar to the crisis of the late 1920s, early 1930s, when the whole economy was shrinking and trade imbalances appeared. Countries closed their borders and leading the world into disaster. So I'm quite pessimistic on the economy, especially now as we are facing a second lockdown in most countries. At the same time, when we talk about the impact of COVID, we have to think about what's happening in terms of geopolitics and also conflict within societies. We see that there are many conflicts around the world within societies to start with. Think about what's happening in Thailand right now, or what happened in Hong Kong a few months ago. People go to the streets and are not very happy with their governments. And it's of course, a political claim they have, but also an economic claim, because many of the young people feel left behind and go to the streets. And it's mostly actually a conflict between the elites, those people who are governing our countries, and the normal citizens. And this whole movement already started quite prior to the pandemic, actually 2 years ago, with the Yellow Vest movement in France, when hundreds of thousands of people went to the streets of Paris with their yellow vests and trying to make their voice heard towards the government, saying that, we, the people, need more support. And I see so many imbalances between the elites and, the normal citizens. And this movement, the Yellow Vest movement, spilled over to even countries like Chile and other countries in Latin America, all over the world. And some observers said basically that, like a new global revolution is in the making, because all these conflicts are being linked, and social media, of course, is helping those protests to be heard of. So that's on the protest within societies. What about the conflicts between countries, between nations? We see more and more conflict happening in Syria, in Libya. Recently, the conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan. And it looks like, ladies and gentlemen, that the world is out of order, and there's so many conflicts coming up, and people just point fingers It's never you, it's never me, it's always the other person, the other country. And that's really what's happening, you know, so much conflict. And what really it's missing is global coordination, you know, where we can come back to peace and mutual understanding. Maybe the most important or the most severe conflict I see is a conflict between the US and China. And I believe there's a new Cold War in the making, and you know, so much finger pointing, a lot of Machiavellian mindset between both countries, and there's no level playing field anymore. It started with a trade conflict around 2 years ago. You know, America was proclaiming that all the exports from China to the US were subsidized and destroying American jobs. But it's much more than a trade conflict. It's also a conflict for technology. You know, some of the large Chinese tech companies like Huawei, like Lenovo, like Tencent and others are competing with Apple, Amazon and Google. And the question is really, you know, which country is taking the lead in terms of technological advances. So that's this coming Cold War, and from a trade war to a technology war, it might lead actually to real conflict in the South China Sea. So that's the most serious conflict I see. And if you look into, you know, where US and China are moving, you see that the power of US is more and more waning, and US has less and less to say in the world. Because, you know, when President Trump came into power, he canceled many trade arrangements in Asia, but also in Europe. There's actually an ongoing conflict between the US and Europe on trade. At the same time, China is rising, and China actually, of course, the pandemic started in Wuhan. It was the first country affected, but now actually today the new numbers, the statistics were released, and China's economic figures look actually quite good and quite surprising, you know, how fast the country could recover. But even beyond the pure numbers and economic power, China is holding more and more political power in Asia. More and more countries, you know, are going along with China. China is embarking on the so-called New Silk Road, going through Central Asia and into Europe. And many European countries actually are signing up on this New Silk Road, including Italy and Greece and others, and mostly also countries in the Balkan region. So China is using soft power and, you know, step by step increasing its standing in the world. And, you know, I think it's a very dangerous situation, you know, when one country is moving up and one country is moving down, and this might lead to conflict in the future. I just hope, you know, that both countries can find a level playing field and a new way to collaborate. You know, we at Horasis are always neutral. You know, we are not saying anything against any country. We are just observing, and like Rotarians, we want to see peace in the making and the avoidance of any conflict. And India, I think, has a very important role here to play. You know, as an intermediary, of course, you have your own conflict with China on the border. But beyond that, you know, there are trade relations between both countries. And at the, you know, long term, I think all nations have to come together and join hands. So basically, let me go into the analysis on all what's happening here. I see two major trends in the world. One trend is a trend leading us to populism, nationalism, and chauvinism. It's a kind of dog eat dog mentality, where you know, countries fight against each other, where different, you know, groups of people within countries fight against each other. Young people against old people, people without power, people against less power. And this is very worrisome, you know, this kind of new Machiavellian mindset where basically the end justifies the means. You know, talking about populism, in most European countries, we see populist parties on the rise, you know, in countries like Italy, for example, or France, all over. In some countries, even, they're in the government. Take, for example, Hungary. And, those populist parties are interpreting democracy in a new way. So that's one trend. That's maybe the negative trend, but I also see a positive trend. I think, the pandemics actually could be a chance. The pandemics could lead to more multilateralism and to more understanding. We see more and more coordination happening. And this second trend, the trend towards multilateral thinking, is hopefully the trend which will prevail on the long term. We at Horasis support multilateralism. We want to bring different groups together. It's a multi-stakeholder approach, as I mentioned before. And at our meetings, everybody can join, everybody can meet and engage in dialogue. And from dialogue, we also have to move to action in very concrete projects. And maybe, the old institutions of the past lost their power. You have to think about World Bank, IMF, even the UN, and private organizations are, the new way of collaboration. And of course, it's not only Horasis, there are many others doing that, but the more the better. We need this multi-stakeholder approach, which is actually very much based on altruism. Why do I say altruism? Altruism means that you don't expect a direct return on what you give and what you do. But on the long term, maybe something comes back because the whole environment, the whole system is growing, it's getting stronger. And yourself, as an entrepreneur, as a country, as a government, will also take a long-term advantage. And if everybody would follow the concept of altruism, I think the world would be a much better place to live on. We put new governance or new frameworks of governance as the topic of this talk. And let me share some ideas on how this new governance model could look like. I'm very much a fan of the United Nations. UN is just celebrating its 75th anniversary. And we celebrated actually this anniversary at our last Horasis meeting. We had a big major session on the anniversary with several head of state speaking. The UN should be strengthened and not weakened. Some countries cutting their payments to the UN, especially United States. I think it should be the contrary. We need strong international organizations like the UN, but also the World Trade Organization, WTO, which is less and less visible, and less countries are respecting the judgments of the World Trade Organizations. So strengthening the UN, but also organizations like the G20. India is a very important partner of the member of the G20. The G20 should actually replace the club of the G7 and G8, because that's something of the past. The industrialized countries of the past, of the 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s. Now it's a new reality, and India is very much a leader in G20, and that's an organization we should all support and also see how the G20 could work with the private sector. Let me say a few words about India, because India is so close to my heart, and of course I'm observing what's happening in India. I think you have currently a very good government. Prime Minister Modi is well respected in the world. He tries also to mitigate the risk of conflict. He's engaging. His government is very visible on the multilateral scene, also at the UN, and it's definitely a way to go. On the economy, of course, like any country, any nation, India's economy is very much impacted. You know all the numbers. You're all business people, and of course, in your daily life, what it means. I believe India on the long term could be the new global engine of economic growth, a bit like China, or even better than China. maybe, you know, in 5 years' time, India will overtake China when it comes to exports. Of course, one main advantage India is having is a system of democracy, and China is more top-down, and India is bottom-up. And you know, currently processes take longer. The Chinese just decide and do it. In India, it takes longer. But on the long term, you know, it's a main advantage for India, you know, the system of democracy and exchange, also having very strong states. What foreigners usually forget is that, you know, India is not just New Delhi, but India is a continent of very strong states run, you know, by their own local governments who develop their own local constituencies. So, you know, I'm very optimistic for India. What India should do maybe is to ease in foreign direct investment, to have more investors coming in. I think that's very much at the forefront of the government's policy, but in practice, there's still hurdles for companies to come in. And, you know, the paperwork and all that. But, you know, India is taking a leap forward when it comes to digitalization. And, you know, I think overtaking maybe one step of development. And, you know, the whole digital process is so important of India. You know, when the digitalization happened and the demonetization, you know, there was a lot of debate if it's the right thing or the wrong thing. It was definitely a shock therapy, but I think on the long term, it was the right thing to do. Even so, you know, there was a cost in terms of GDP growth on the short term, but on the long term, I think digital is the way to go. I think there's no way back, and COVID is really accelerating digitalization. So yes, India, I think, is on the right run. I think you should carry on as you do. It's a stable government, and trying to also engage with your neighbors in the SAARC regions, countries like Nepal, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and the Maldives. I think, you know, SAARC should be strengthened as well. I mentioned international organizations before, but also regional organizations. SAARC could do much, much more. I think, you know, think about what ASEAN is doing in neighboring Asia, but also the European Union. And here, I think India, as the largest country in SAARC, should also play, you know, the leading role and uniting the whole South Asian continent. As most of you friends, Rotarians, you're business people, I want just to reflect a bit before we open for discussion. I want to reflect a bit on the role of companies and of entrepreneurs and CEOs, as you all are. We talked about, you know, global issues, conflicts. We talked about new ways of governance. But what does it all mean for businesses as you are? I believe COVID is a chance. I think it's not a blessing in disguise, of course, but it's a chance to reflect a bit on capitalism and how we should shape capitalism in the future. Capitalism basically is focused on very short-term results. You know, we have a stock exchange, companies are listed, and sometimes, you know, large companies, especially in America, they basically reduce the workforce and then the share price goes up, which is kind of a paradox. A very short-term oriented principle actually built around quarterly reporting and the so-called shareholder value. I believe we have to move into what I would like to call stakeholder value, where companies deal with the whole social environment, of course, with their employees, with their clients, but also society at large. And even CEOs and entrepreneurs should be a bit like statesmen who also deal with global issues, because more and more companies are impacted what's happening globally. So you can't just operate, you know, locally where you are and export, but you have to see what's happening in the world and adjust your strategies, maybe go into outsourcing here, but maybe take back business here. And I think, you know, CEOs have to be very vigilant. And I see CEOs as global citizens who really, deal with global issues. So that's my view on capitalism. I would like to call it inclusive capitalism, built around purpose. I think all companies need a purpose to say that, we have to deal with society. We want to be good public citizens. We want to work for the public good. And purpose is so important. It should be in your DNA. And it's not just an add-on like corporate social responsibility, CSR, but it should be built in all your services, in all your products, in all your your corporate culture. And when you do that, I think companies will be extremely successful. Even today already, shareholders, people who invest in companies, look into the purpose-driven approach of companies and say, is a company doing good things or bad things? How is it dealing with society? How are companies treating their employees? What about, climate change? And we didn't talk about climate change before. Climate change is a very abstract model or abstract thing, maybe being discussed at the UN or by people like Greta Thunberg and governments. But I think all of us, we can contribute to tackle climate change, and all companies should go for a carbon-free approach on the long term, maybe by the next 15, 20 years to be totally carbon neutral. And there are already, a lot of companies trying to do so and committing to be carbon neutral. So that's what I would like to call a new social contract, where the business sector is a very important part of it, and that companies always have the big picture in mind and try to make a positive contribution. I started, friends, my short speech and reflections by saying that the current state of the world is quite gloomy. It might look gloomy, when you just check out the news every day. But I think, we should be optimists. We should be positive. We should also believe that technology can help us a lot. Think about, the fourth industrial revolution, or even the fifth industrial revolution, where technology is embedded in society. And with innovation, with new technologies, with digital technologies, we can do a lot. The future of work, when it comes to digital processes, of course, with AI, artificial intelligence, with blockchain, with digitalization, a lot of people will lose their jobs on top of COVID. But also a lot of people will gain new jobs, because, we need more highly trained people in the area of IT and digital services. And again, here, India is very well placed, because you have a very vibrant IT industry in Mumbai, Bangalore, Hyderabad, and many other places. So yeah, maybe let me end here and open the floor for questions. And again, let me say that the future is bright. Hopefully we will overcome COVID very soon. Hopefully we will go for the trend I mentioned before, multilateral thinking, and giving up populism, nationalism, and chauvinism, in making this place, the world, a better place to live on, and really to believe in Mother Earth as well. So thanks so much, Rotarians, and looking forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Frank. That was exceedingly interesting. We have Mudit. Mudit, would you like to start with your question?
Yeah, thank you, Frank, for your insightful and frank comments. My question is, why don't governments cut to the chase? For example, America invaded Iraq by saying their weapons of mass destruction, but actually the reason was something else. And embedded in that is you're talking about multilateralism in countries. I'm a proud Indian. I have very opposing views of what you feel about India. So if multilateralism is practiced within countries, institutions like the UN and WTO will be much stronger. Otherwise, they're just another platform, and strong-arm leaders continue to get more publicity and don't necessarily reflect the people of its citizens. Your comments, sir. Thank you.
Right. I understand your concern, and your concerns are shared by a lot of people who feel that, international organizations or even governments are very abstract. They're somewhere far away in New York or Brussels, and there's no link to the citizens. I met many leaders of the UN, and just recently the UN Secretary General Guterres, and I strongly believe they are good leaders. They're not elected by the people. That's correct. It's not democratic, but they I think, what the UN is doing, they just pick the best people. It's a process, for many, many years, and they go and say who's being groomed. And, a lot of issues can't be really solved by one nation alone. There's, climate change. How can one country alone tackle with climate change? Or water shortage and many other things. We need global coordination, and the only way to do that is to trust international organizations. Of course, there should be controlled. There should be reliable for what they do, and if they're not doing a good job, there should be replaced, and replaced by different leaders or even different organizations. The UN system is basically built after the First World War, and then again the Second World War. It's a very old system, and we need to give, for example, India a permanent seat in the UN Security Council. Because it's not reality that the old powers, even countries like France and England are there, but India not. This has to change immediately, and so we need reforms in the United Nations. And but finally, it's a family of countries working together, not only in the Security Council, but also on health issues. The WHO, the World Health Organization, has a very important role to play. And without them, I think, pandemic would be extremely chaotic, and would be no coordination. So yes, I believe in this increased level of multilateral thinking.
Thank you. Farhat, you had a question?
Yeah. Frank, I wanted your thoughts on China's domination of Africa. It's becoming a colony of China, and the kind of investments that they made across Africa in all countries, they're amounting to $200 billion a year and going up to trillions in future, and 100 airports and many ports, etc. I mean, how do you see, this whole business of soft loans and, they're luring the African leaders, etc. Do you see a serious domination of China, of Africa over the next decade or so?
Well, you're right. There's more and more influence of China in Africa, and more investment, and more political influence. And I traveled to around 35 African countries in the last 2 years, because we are thinking also of creating Horasis Africa meeting. And whenever I go to the club floor of a hotel, I meet the Chinese, and mostly Chinese, almost no European, no American, maybe a few Indians. India has also historically a strong link with Africa, as you know, mostly in Western Africa or in South Africa as well. But the Chinese are everywhere. Even they go now to the French-speaking countries. They're all over. And the question really is it good or bad? On the one hand, I believe it's good that Africa is receiving investment. Africa for many years just received donations and humanitarian help. And many African nations want to do business, and they're very keen, to deal with the outside world, to trade and develop products. The Chinese discovered this early on, and the Western world, and I include India here, didn't really find a response. Europe basically is neglecting Africa, with exception of France and the former colonies. But otherwise, not much happening. America is neglecting Africa. So, I wouldn't say that it's China's fault that, the others are not there, but the others should come more strongly and build a level playing field with the Chinese. And if not, you're right, Africa will be a Chinese colony. I wouldn't say colony because colony is a word of the past, but it's a bit, you know, the continent where the Chinese build up more and more power. And of course, we know that Africa has a lot of natural resources. You know, you have gold, you have copper, you have oil, you have everything, right?
Yeah.
And that's what the Chinese need because it's you know, a resource-hungry country. But let me just give you a few more details on Chinese investments. Usually, we mostly see the investments of large state-owned companies, which of course, you know, the state is driving them, and it's mostly going into infrastructure, you know, like the energy sector. It goes to highways, it goes to hospitals and schools, and it's all soft power, as you say. But, you know, more and more private companies are investing, and they're not directed by the state. They just do it for the profit. And what's extremely interesting, you know, when you go to small places in Africa, small villages, you see a lot of Chinese. And I always ask myself, what are the Chinese doing there? And basically what China already started 20 years ago, they put their prisoners into Africa. They said, you know, instead of sitting in prison, you can go to Africa and you're far away. And those people started to build like small shops and trading. And that's, you know, so interesting how the Chinese have a foothold here. But at the end of the day, I think, you know, the response should be that everybody should go to Africa because it's the continent of the future. It's, you know, I'm very bullish on Africa. If Africa can put its act together, you know, on governance issues, corruption is a big issue in some countries, Africa will be shining. And, you know, we should not just give humanitarian aid, but we should invest.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Fahd.
SV, can you ask your question, please?
Yeah, thanks, President Frame. My video is, you know, the connection is slightly weak, so I'm not switching my video on. Frank, first of all, excellent speech. And one takeaway was you are very optimistic. And I've just got a couple of related questions because it said that in terms of known history of the world, I think we are living in the most peaceful period after World War II. So it's not all gloom and doom. My couple of questions are in terms of the Belt Road Initiative. The impression in India, or at least I carry, is not as rosy as the picture you painted. Maybe because of COVID or whatever reasons, BRI is not progressing as well. India has been, right from beginning, they've been opposing it. Many other countries have joined in. That's question number one, your views. Question number two is you talked about UN. Don't you think it's better from G20, a new UN coming out, rather than trying to repackage UN? Because UN has got people like France and UK with no offense meant. They're all powers of the past. I mean, they are having their own problems today. Your comments on both, please. Thank you.
Right. Yeah. Let me start with your last question, if I may. And I mentioned already that we have to reform the UN and, you know, get India a permanent seat and maybe unite France and the UK, the two permanent members from Europe, into a European seat. Just one seat for the whole of Europe. It's enough, right? We don't need France. We don't need the UK. Of course, tell this our French and British friends. They don't like to give up their seat, but there should, and I think there should be some global, you know, pressure on those two countries. One European seat and getting India in, and maybe also an African power. I would also say that, you know, South Africa and maybe Nigeria should be there. So that's important. On India, I agree with you also that India's growth potential is much higher than what we see right now. I would see India in double-digit growth. It should be there, you know, but before COVID, you know, it was, I wouldn't say underperforming, but it was below, you know, the growth it has. The question is really, what is the reason for that? And maybe, you know, there are a couple of reasons. I mentioned earlier already, FDI is not as easy as in other countries. On paper, yes, but in practice, more difficult. You know, a lot of multinationals are, you know, having grievances, you know, when they invest, unfortunately, you know, and that's just an observation. It's not an opinion. Secondly, you know, Indian companies should be more export oriented, and we don't really see a lot of Indian exports. going to the world. If you look into the numbers, right? India is not really an export nation, but should it be? Of course, India is very strong when it comes to services, and especially IT services. Companies like Infosys, TCS, Wipro, and others. But trading also goods to the world, and to put like the Made in India label behind that. And I think that's the way to go for the branding, to say like proud Indian companies, proud Indian goods being consumed by the world. Yeah, I think Indian entrepreneurs should be more export oriented, and maybe more, I wouldn't say aggressive, but more active, looking into not just exports, but also putting up subsidiaries all around the world, and manufacturing there. And then I think things will be much better. So it's an inward-outward approach, accepting FDI, but also exporting and investing to the outside world. Yeah, maybe just coming back on your last point, because I like your comment. Should we replace the UN? We shouldn't replace UN. I think, if you would like to reinvent the wheel, it takes years and years. And the question is really where this would lead. I think we need to reform the UN, but complement UN with regional organizations we're having, like European Union, SAARC, ASEAN, NAFTA, and others, but also organizations like G20, which are mostly acting on the economic side, but not on geopolitics like the UN is doing. And yes, we have to strengthen the global international system. That's my plea and my wish.
Thank you. Thank you.
Fali, you're muted. Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Fali. Yes, good afternoon, Frank. Thank you for that talk. I have two questions. One is, you have not touched upon the India-China hostilities which have been taken place, and what are your views on that? And the second is, there's been some pushback in a few countries now on the BRI, especially because of the high interest rates which these so-called soft loans have been given, and that the future generations would really be saddled with a huge debt and repayment obligations. And there has been a lot of animosity. I've also heard that there have been local communities in Africa protesting also against BRI and the Chinese population there, and pushing them back. So how do you think this is going to completely play out now? Thank you.
Right. Yes. On the BRI, you are absolutely right. When the initiative was announced around 10 years ago, there was a lot of hope that China can develop countries along the old Silk Road, but many investments are beyond or are behind expectations, especially in Central Asia, countries like Kyrgyzstan, for example, or Uzbekistan. They're very much hope for investment, but it's not coming. And interest rates are high. In some countries, the BI was quite successful, and I should mention Pakistan here, because China and Pakistan had these traditional alliances against India, also in obviously, when it comes to the Karakoram highway they built in the past. And what China did, because Pakistan is not able to pay back, or the interest rates are too high, they basically get hold of whole port areas or even cities like on a loan. And so for Pakistan, on the short term, the investment might be good, but on the long term, of course, it's a huge dependency on China. And the same is happening with Greece, the first country in Europe signing in the BI. China actually again bought into the port of Athens, Piraeus, and same thing. It's like a long-term loan, and similar things even in Southeast Asia and countries like Cambodia or Laos. So yes, I see that also very critical. At the end of the day, I think, when it comes to the BI, the Chinese see it as like a new Marshall Plan. And I would say investment or some investment is better than no investment. But we have to work on governance, and we have to work with the Chinese also on transparency, to make the whole kind of process, who is investing where, more transparent. And transparency is key here, and not to hide anything. So that's the first question. On Africa, yes, there's more and more protest within African countries, especially the working class. There have been several conflicts recently in Zambia, for example, where people working in mines protested against the Chinese when it comes to the working conditions, security and safety. And here, that's definitely something to improve. To make it better, and what the Chinese do, unfortunately, they sometimes bring their own people to Africa to work. So they put them, building a highway. When the highway is built, they send them back. But what would be much, much better is to employ local people on the ground and to provide employment. You had one more question. What was it?
About the India-China hostilities and how you haven't touched upon it as yet.
Yeah, the India-China hostilities, of course, they always come up and down, and now it's up again. And I wish that the two leaders speak and find an agreement. And that China's expansion there on the border, there should be a clear line and say, that's the line which is agreed on both sides. And avoiding any kind of war, and because this kind of hostilities come up every 5 to 10 years, and that's very bad. And I think Prime Minister Modi is taking the right steps. He's discussing, of course, not giving up Indian land, but being in discussion with China. And I think that's the way to go to engage in a dialogue, because the two main powers of Asia, they should work together on the long term and not fight against each other. Personally, and it's again the motto of Rotary, peace is what we need to look into, and peace is the ultimate goal. And I'm a pacifist. I think at the end, the best would be if we would all give up our arms and would have any arm trade anymore, and we just live in peace. Think about a country in Latin America, Costa Rica. Costa Rica has no army. They abandoned the army already, I think, some 20, 30 years ago, because they say we are a peaceful country. Who should invade us? And there's no protection. Everybody could, but they're not, right? Because it's such a peaceful country. And I think that's the approach to go for.
Thank you.
We have one more question from SV, from Pratap. Pratap, are you there?
Yeah, I'm there. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yes, Frank, thank you for that perspective. So you say that you would like peace, but I'm seeing that the kind of regimes that are going on right now are of authoritarianism, where everybody, the leaders of so many countries at the same time seem to be leading their countries with an iron fist, so to say. So that's one concern of mine, not a question, and I want you to sort of comment on that. But the other one was that given that this chaos of the pandemic has caused so many international relations to be reset, and India's aspiration to build India as a manufacturing hub, which is a tough nut to crack given our track record, and that if we are holding China as a model in manufacturing, do you think strategically Germany can be a good alliance partner as far as that aspiration of India is concerned?
Right. I happen to be a German, as you might know, even so I live in Switzerland. So happy you mentioned this. Germany has actually quite an active and proactive approach and friendship with India. And, large German companies like Siemens or Bosch have been active in India for many, many years. Now the automotive industry has been moving to Pune and other places. So manufacturing is happening. I think it should be more. India should be, like one of the main partner markets of German car manufacturing companies, but also other sectors. But yes, Chancellor Angela Merkel, I think, has a very special link with India, and also Prime Minister Modi. Both leaders are in permanent contact. So, looking into Europe, I think Germany should be the main partner, is already the main partner. Traditionally, of course, UK has been the main partner, but I checked the numbers recently in terms of export, imports, investment. Actually, UK only comes number 5 or number 6 in Europe. Even the Netherlands, small Netherlands, has more business with India than the UK, which is quite astonishing. But yes, by far, Germany is leading, and this friendship should be increased. On your first point about leaders and the fact that we see more and more people who are not legitimate, or we can even call them dictators, is quite worrisome. Think about what's happening in Belarus. With Mr. Lukashenko, and elections which are doubtful, and people stay in power, and this is happening all around the world, and we have strong men all over. Of course, we have another example is Russia, we have Turkey, and other places, and even maybe the United States. I read a comment this morning saying that if President Trump is losing the election, he might actually not accept the result, and said he will stay in power, and this is already a sign of a strong man who doesn't want to go. Again, we are neutral. We are not saying we are for Trump or for Biden, but in case Trump loses, we might actually see a lot of violence in the US, maybe something similar to, I wouldn't say a civil war, but in some locations, people going to the street with their guns. And, there have been already announcements will do so. They'll never accept the result of the election. And this is very bad, not very bad. It's a tragedy. Think about, America as the protector of democracy, and people fighting even with their guns. And, when it comes to the possession of guns, I'm totally against that. Why do we need guns if we want to go for peace? But there's a very strong lobby in the US. So yes, strong men all over. We need more enlightenment and enlightened leaders, people who have a really global mindset. People like Angela Merkel, to mention, maybe also President Macron in France, and also your Prime Minister Modi.
Thank you.
Dushyant, go ahead.
Yeah. Hi, Frank. This is Dushyant Dave. We have, it has always been a pleasure to attend your lovely conferences. You had invited me last time at the Interlaken, where I spoke on the stressed investment opportunities in India.
Yeah, thanks so much again for joining.
Yeah.
Great to see you.
Yes. I understand you are now tying up with IMC Chambers for a digital conference. So my question is that, are we now entering the new era of normal era of digital conferences for a couple of years to come, and we'll all get used to it? What's your normal prediction about meeting people in person?
Digital is a new normal, and on some days I've like up to 20 video calls. For example, today, I woke up at 4:30 Swiss time, and I had a 5:30 live interview with Indonesia, all live per video. And then, I have this talk, and then I have a full series of video talks throughout the day. And what I'm doing actually right now, I have actually Zoom-free days where I say, today I'm not accepting any Zoom call. I just want to focus, on my work or other things I'm doing, because it's just, you have Zoom calls all the time. But, I'm a fan of video conferences. They could be very efficient, even more efficient than in-person meetings. Actually, next week, I have a video call with the president of Nigeria on a one-to-one, which maybe to get like a meeting in person, it's very difficult, but he accepted to have like a 20 minutes debate. We talk about our initiatives in Africa. And so it works, but it works basically only if there's already a contact before. If you know the other person, if the other person, you can trust in. If you just do like a cold call with somebody on a video, right, it won't have the same result. The whole kind of socializing is missing when you meet in person and have a little joke or talk about the old days or whatever. But still, it becomes very close to reality. For the conferences, yes, at Horasis, we are planning ahead with digital events. We hope that in the second half of next year, we will be able again to host in-person meetings. Maybe already our India meeting, which is planned for end of June. If by then, the vaccine is on the market, perhaps, or most likely, I don't know. We have to reassess the situation. But, in digital events, you can do a lot of things. For example, what we do, we have a lot of networking opportunities, so the speakers can contact each other. And we have something what we call digital cocktail parties. So basically, all participants are in a digital room, and there's a random algorithm, and you will always be matched with somebody for a 5-minute power talk. And then the next person is reading for you, almost like when you go to a cocktail party with a drink and meet somebody and go to the next. So that's possible, but again, it will never replace fully, of course, in-person meetings. And I see all of you sitting at your home offices, and what's really missing is the social interaction. When you go around, meet your friends, meet for dinner. That is definitely missing, and we are social human beings, and we need this interaction.
It's a good idea, digital cocktail party. President.
Yeah, please join us next time. I'll send you an invite.
Frank, we have one last question from one of our young Rotaractors. I think I'll ask him to speak now. Om, are you on the line?
Yeah. Hi, so yeah, good afternoon. So my question was concerning this year's unstable international USA's unstable international relations with Korea, North Korea especially, within those lines, does North Korea is unveiling massive new ballistic missiles in their military parade sends a threatening message to world peace or an arms race, maybe?
Right. Oh, what a question. That's now we move really up to like the hot potatoes and really like geopolitics. North Korea is a very special case, and it's so different to many of the other conflicts. The North Korean issue, of course, is here since the 1950s, the Korean War. Unfortunately, they are amassing more and more technology, especially when it comes to nuclear technologies, and one day they will be unfortunately be ready maybe to launch such a missile, and this has to be prevented. President Trump tried to do so. It is 2 historic meetings with a North Korean leader, but finally the discussions failed. At one point President Trump was already on the list for the next Nobel Award for Peace, saying that he can settle the North Korean issue, but he did not, and North Korea is definitely threatening. But my thoughts actually are with the people of North Korea. People living there under miserable conditions, and having a very harsh life, especially in winter. There's famine. People don't have enough to eat. And we don't know what COVID is doing in the country because there's no outside reporting. So yes, what the North Korean government is doing is one thing, but my thoughts are, the people of North Korea and how they can survive and deal with this regime.
All right. Thank you so much, Frank.
Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you very much for that. I think we've come to an end of today's afternoon. So let me ask Satya to please give the official vote of thanks.
With pleasure. Thank you, Frank, for sharing truly fascinating thoughts. It is always interesting to know the international perspective, and more so from a leading intellectual like yourself. Your nuanced insights and your message of optimism for India gives us encouragement for what the future holds. And as a token of appreciation for spending this afternoon with us and your morning with us, we shall light up a rural household using solar power. We will be sending you the certificate in due course. And
thank you so much.
And for the members, there's an announcement next week. The meeting will be on Zoom on the 27th at 7 p.m. in the evening. The speaker will be Ms. Smita Jatia, who is the Managing Director of Hardcastle Restaurants Private Limited. She runs the McDonald's India, the Western and Southern region. And the topic will be Meet the Burger Queen. Statistics for today, we had a maximum participation of 80 and the meeting is now closed. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Thanks very much. Thank you.
Thanks so much to everybody, and you're a great team.
Thank you, Frank.
Glad to be in touch.
Frank.
All the best to you.
Thank you, Mr. Richter.
Frank.
Thank you,
Frank.
it was terrific.
Thank you.
Hi,
Thank you
Mohit.
so much. Bye bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Fali.
Thank you.
Thank you, Fali. Thank you.
Thank you, Fali, for a good
Thank you, Fali, for a lovely meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Farad. That was very nice as well. Thank you.